Just wanted to talk about the Alabama Republicans refusing to draw a second black congressional district. The Supreme Court had ordered. It's a news article by Jane C. Timm. It was in July 21st, 2023. There was a time when racists would try to see how much they could get away with when under a Supreme Court order. They would just try to go right up to the edge of the line, a bit like kids in the back seat of a car on a long ride. Now they just want to force the Supreme Court to openly embrace their hate. And this latest incarnation of the court has acquiesced of the right-wing dementia with relish. Ironically, this defiance that we're seeing in this is a perfect example of why the Voting Rights Act was needed in the first place. I think they expected the court to go their way the last time, but they were a little butthurt about it. Maybe free vacations, use of a yacht, and free tuition for family members just doesn't buy what it used to. The question is, will it be enough when it does come down to it? Now, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, the champion of his career above all else, he has been in contact with a few Alabama legislatures, but for some reason, I think that has more to do with wanting to stay speaker than wanting to see fair elections. Now, I hope this doesn't come across even slightly disingenuous when I say that I'm certain the efforts of the Alabama Republican Party left no stone unturned in their efforts to make sure that their constituents were properly represented. Well, I lied. I don't think there was the slightest effort at all. This is just another attempt to weaken the Voting Rights Act. With over 25% of Alabama being African American in 7 districts, it seems like the efforts of the body could only devise one majority black district. Now, I don't expect the Supreme Court to consider enforcing a map made by an outside group, which is one option available to them if they ultimately don't meet this. But I do have a low expectation of the Supreme Court at this point. Now, I hope I am pleasantly surprised, but I wouldn't hold my breath. But the Voting Rights Act, as I touched on, was one of the most important critical pieces of legislation to guarantee the voting rights of minorities in the U.S. It empowered the 14th and 15th to do what they actually lack the teeth to do. Now, the thing is, though, is that one thing I am well aware of is that the 3/5 mentality, I can assure you, is alive and well in Alabama. Now, Cynthia, I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I would say that I am shocked Alabama disobeyed the court to uphold their racist district maps, but that would be like saying that I did not think I would get wet if I walked outside during the rain without an umbrella. But, I am more concerned about the implications when it comes to state legislatures completely disregarding the Supreme Court rulings. So, what do we think are the consequences here? Do you think that Alabama disobeying the court will set precedents for other states to do the same? What are your thoughts, Tim?
I mean, I hope not. I mean, realistically, probably.
Mm.
Yes.
What states would we probably see this in? Texas, Florida, Mississippi, Georgia. The usual suspects. I certainly hope not. It's scary, and gerrymandering is alive and well in all these states, and we know it. I mean, it's not just a problem in Alabama. It may be the most egregious case to come forward right now, but I mean, spending most of my youth in Mississippi and growing up in Mississippi, I mean, I knew this was a problem even then. Our social studies teacher was telling us about the gerrymandering problems in Mississippi and how they're drawn on racial lines quite often, and so.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy, specifically with Mississippi, because Mississippi is like almost 40% black.
Yeah.
Mm.
But you can definitely tell, especially when you are looking at the infrastructure of the state and some of the issues that they're having and who has the most issues. They're normally in areas where it's concentrated African American. But I want to go a little bit down south, and not necessarily Mississippi. I mean south of the border, and ask our residential cartoon. Have you ever heard tale of gerrymandering?
No, I had to Google it. I had to actually go and Google it. I'm going to read what I found. Gerrymandering is a controversial practice and has been the subject of legal challenges to ensure fair and equitable representation for all citizens. Apparently, guys, over there in the USA, you don't have like a group of senators chosen by people, but you go like making maps and choosing one person from each part of that. It's so weird. The USA is so weird. You have to explain this to me, because for me, this is all new alien territory.
We're a bunch of weirdos up here. Yes, we are.
I
Well,
have realized that.
gerrymandering more so is when a state, a legislature, will draw up district lines and basically on who lives where, so that that will kind of like uh, maneuver a vote the way that said legislature wants to maneuver it. Now, with Alabama being mostly a red state, this is mostly people who are in the legislature who happen to lean more Republican. Then they're going to draw lines around certain areas in order for them to be able to have voters be able to choose more likely a Republican candidate to represent said area. Problem is with that, as Glenn talked about it, is that when you are drawing lines based on party affiliation per se and sensibilities when it comes to policies with party affiliation, then you do have groups of people that will get annexed out, especially when it comes to their vote. And oftentimes, when gerrymandering happens, like Tim, you mentioned Mississippi does it, Texas does it. I mean, they gerrymander in Illinois, where I'm at. They
Louisiana.
gerrymander in Wisconsin, Louisiana. I mean, Louisiana actually even had one of the same issues, but they actually got their particular lawsuit in their favor. But regardless of that, it often disenfranchises Black voters, and Black voters are not able to really choose representatives that would represent their interest when it comes to whether if it's in the state legislature or even the federal legislature, because these district lines can also even affect our federal congressional representatives, whether if you are a senator and also as a what do you call them people? This is House of Representatives. Yeah, that's what
Yes.
you call them. That's what you call them.
I do want to say,
Yeah.
in Texas, especially, I taught debate, I taught high school debate for a little bit, and we kind of went over this in my debate class because I taught mostly Hispanic students. A lot of the lines are drawn to disenfranchise Hispanic voters because there's such a majority minority in Texas. So you see that a lot here. I do want to add in one thing really quickly because I thought this was really interesting. It came to my mind as we were talking about this article, and Teo, you might find this particularly interesting. Gerrymandering got its name from being a portmanteau of salamander and Elbridge Gerry, vice president of the United States at the time of his death, who signed a bill to create a partisan district in Boston, and that area was compared to the shape of a salamander. That's how gerrymandering. That's why gerrymandering is called what it is. It's Jerry and salamander together. If you can believe it, kind of crazy.
I
I
first
do
thought
believe
you
it,
were
but
going to
it's
say.
weird.
I first thought you were going to say salmon, and then I was like, "Damn, I'm
Oh.
hungry." But but regardless of that, so I wanted to post something else to you guys. I want you to think about this. Like, so can the left use the same tactics Alabama is using to disobey the court on some of the problematic cases that have been passed through the court? Anybody want to weigh in on that? What about you, Infidel?
Well, I would say that it's an option, but right now, ultimately, anything they try to pass is going to end up with that same right wing reactionary court that we're facing right now.
Mm.
While they're very receptive to, yeah, let's go ahead and spread the people we don't like over a wide distribution so we don't have a concentrated effort so they can actually get representation, I don't think we'd find nearly the same receptiveness if we tried to do that with more progressive policies. I definitely think there's an agenda. I think that unfortunately there are at least bad actors at this point on the Supreme Court who have demonstrated time and again that they don't really care about the rule of law. They care about promoting an agenda. And as long as you have that, it's going to be pushback. I'm really hoping that Biden gets at least one chance to put one more person on the Supreme Court so we can kind of get this back to a 5-4 where Roberts can at least become relevant because he likes playing relevant from time to time.
Time.
Yeah.
But even like with maybe if we get like somebody else that actually will balance out the Supreme Court, we also have to consider people who happen to be in federal courts and appellate courts that are under them, and even federal judges who happen to be in other districts as well that could possibly rule on cases like this, whether if they deem a legislature drew lines that happen to be racially motivated or not. But even just like thinking about all of this stuff, especially when we're talking about gerrymandering, and I know, Glenn, that you pretty much mentioned mostly the Voters' Rights Act of 1965 really being the basis on making sure that votes coming from the electorate are counted properly and in a more equitable scene, even though that a lot of the issues specifically with the Voters' Rights Act was gutted in 2013 as far as like the efficacy of some of the things that the Voters' Rights Act was doing, and we may have like a long list of civil rights different civil rights activists that were pushing for more equitable voting, who were, what's the good word, killed because they were trying to actually push forward like, listen, if I'm a citizen, my vote should count. I should be able to vote without impedance, and I should not necessarily have certain barriers that are placed on me just because I happen to be of a different group other than a majority. And you, Tim, I didn't know that you were a person that came from the South that was witnessing this. Like, what, when you even like read any of this and you were like, privy to like, oh, wow, the Supreme Court voted against Alabama, saying that you absolutely disenfranchised Black voters in your state. And then Alabama said, so what were your thoughts, basically? And we're going to do what we want to do. So what were your thoughts? And do you think that the Supreme Court, and I guess this is going to be for all of you guys, do you really think that the Supreme Court is going to encourage or maybe, find a way to actually enforce their ruling that happened in Alabama?
I hope they do. I mean, we can only just hope they do. I almost said pray, and I still have to catch myself. I'm still excising after 13 years of being an atheist. I'm still excising a lot of this
old habits,
Christianity out of me. Yeah. It's, I mean, this kind of stuff. People in the large majority of people in Mississippi and Alabama aren't talking about this. Mm-hmm. They might not even ever come across this headline. If they do, they don't care. This to them, it is something that should happen, and it's good because they're so ingrained into thinking that these things are normal and how things should be. To them, addressing this issue in the way that we are with alarm and addressing it with emotions of this is frightening and I can't believe this is happening and this is unjust, to them that's leftism. Yep. And that's the enemy, and that's wokeism, and that's the enemy, and they see a certain segment of the population talking about this in a worried way, and to them that just tells them they don't even need to care about this. This isn't an issue. Do you know what I'm saying? So the majority of people in Mississippi, I don't think would even bat an eye. This the majority of people I grew up with, family members and people who spent the majority of my life with. To them, this kind of stuff doesn't even matter.
I've got to say that being from Louisiana, right next door, I remember in the early 90s, there was a big uproar about getting one black majority district in Louisiana, state with almost 30%. I mean, not as heavily populated with a black population as Mississippi, but still very significant. And it was more of a, we let them vote. I mean, they should just mind their place. That's good enough. They can go vote. It doesn't matter if we distribute them. We have these, districts drawn out looking like spaghetti thrown on a map. But, this is what we do to dilute their votes. But yeah, they can go to the vote. They can carry on their thing, and we're going to carry on ours too.
It's Jim Crow shit.
Yep.
Yes.
Exactly.
And, now we're seeing more and more people emboldened. And wanted to touch on one thing. I don't see them pushing this because I know they have the option of saying, you guys had your chance. Now we're going to go to outside sources and do this the right way. I don't see that happening because at the end of the day, I think they want to see this happen. So I think they're going to look at it and say, well, you gave us one black majority. You gave us one that has 40%. Close enough. We'll call it even. But the truth is if you look at the last 15 elections on that one that they're talking about, the only one that a Democratic majority was actually voted in was one where they had a guy who was cruising the mall for underage girls and was kicked out of the state Supreme Court twice, disbarred. So, I mean, if that's the one where you can actually get enough people for a black majority candidate, that's really not good. That's that's underhanded gerrymandering at bare minimum.
Gosh, I think that he wore a 10-gallon hat too, if I'm not mistaken. I think that he did. Teo, you still scared of the United States?
I'm still scared of the United States. I will repeat what I've said before. It's funny how you talk about leftism or the left in the USA. You have right and extremist right. That's it. There is no left over there. And it's so weird to see the right wing of the USA fighting against which one wants to be extremely extremist in their rightness and the one that prefers to be less extremist, and it gets called left because of that. Nope. You are still right wing. And that's it.
Yeah, what we call left is center, maybe just one toe left.
Yeah, the one
center,
that is not
every
totally,
once in a while, but usually not even that.
Yeah.
It's not in the total extreme of the right wing. It's left, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. If you're not completely just like a Christian nationalist, you're considered a left, including other Christians. Yeah. So it's, well, one of the things that I wanted to leave something that's on people's mind, why voting matters, and what the history about, voters' rights activism really is in the United States. This like a few things I wanted to discuss, like, in Ocoee, Florida, on November 2nd, 1920, in what is now the Ocoee Massacre, 50 African Americans were murdered in a brutal massacre because they wanted to exercise their legal right to vote. Wow. In May 7th, 1955, in your neck of the woods, Timm, Belzoni, Mississippi, Reverend George Lee, one of the first Black people who registered to vote in Humphreys County, used his pulpit and his printing press to urge others to vote. White officials offered Lee protection on the condition he end his voters' rights registration efforts, but Lee refused and he was murdered. August 13th, 1955, in Brookhaven, Mississippi. Lamar Smith was shot dead on the courthouse lawn by a white man in broad daylight while dozens of people watched. The killer was never indicted because no one would admit that they saw a white man shoot a black man. Smith had organized blacks to vote in recent elections. Want to leave one more. September 25th, 1961, Liberty, Mississippi. Herbert Lee, who worked with civil rights leader Bob Moses to help register black voters, was killed by a state legislature who claimed self-defense and was never arrested. Louis Allen, a black man who witnessed the murder, also was later killed. And then also, got to do one in Alabama. This is what we're talking about. August 20th, 1965, in Haneyville, Alabama. Jonathan Merrick Daniels, an Episcopal seminary student in Boston, had come to Alabama to help with black voter registration in Loudoun County. He was arrested at a demonstration, jailed in Haneyville, and then suddenly released. Moments after his release, he was shot to death by a deputy sheriff.
Can't pretend I'm surprised.
Yeah.
Always Mississippi. That's why, having grown up there, anytime I look at the state, like they'll do like statistics for each state. What state has the lowest average income level? What state has the lowest education level? What state has the lowest quality of life? It's always, I mean, you don't even have to guess anymore. It's a joke. It's always going to be Mississippi, and this is why.
And just the very fact that Alabama is completely disregarding an already very conservative court when it comes to like, wow, you went a little bit too far with your spaghetti.
Yeah, even them.
Right, your spaghetti drawn together maps is crazy. And I just want to mention to our dear viewers, this is not 1953. We are in 2023. Mm-hmm. But if you want to see more content from this year and what else we got to say, click here.